Good evening and thank you for joining us tonight. My name is Claudia Cereceda and I will be the moderator this evening. First, I would like to begin by thanking everyone who helped make this dialogue possible. The incredible Pietra Dialogues staff, Lucia, Maria, Megan, Adriano, and Anna. The LPD student team, which includes, and it's a long list, Stephanie, Nicoletta, Nicole, Brina, Alice, Yasmin, Kayla, Ophelie, Erica, Dina, Junie, and Carmen. Massimo Sestini, who was kind enough to give us his photo that we've utilized for the graphics of this dialogue. Our wonderful panelists who have joined us this evening. And of course, a big thank you to Ellen, our director. Your support and guidance has been invaluable to me, so thank you. Currently, the immigration situation in Europe is reaching new critical levels. The number of people applying for state protection through asylum applications rose 25% between 2013 and 2014. As of July 2014, the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees estimated that in Italy, there were 76,000 refugees, 22,000 asylum seekers, 350 stateless persons, totaling almost 99,000. A quarter of the applicants are of Afghan, Eritrean, or of Syrian origin. A quarter of the applicants are under the age of 18. Countries with the largest number of asylum applications include Germany, France, Sweden, Italy, and the United Kingdom. In the first quarter of 2015, nearly 500 migrants drowned, which is 10 times as many as in the same period of 2014, with the numbers continuing to rise. After the 2013 Lampedusa shipwreck, in which a boat carrying migrants from Libya to Italy sank, killing over 300 people, the Italian government launched Mare Nostrum, a military operation that rescued over 100,000 people before ending last November amid controversy. The EU then launched Operation Triton, which has been widely criticized for not being as effective as Mare Nostrum. Immigrants and refugees face many journeys when trying to get to Europe. First, they must go from their mother countries like Eritrea and get to the coast where they can get onto a boat, all the while dealing with corrupt smugglers and avoiding being arrested and ending up in prisons like Kufra in Libya, which we had filmmakers Segre and Ymer talk about last week. Then they make a treacherous journey over the Mediterranean on unseaworthy vessels or overcrowded cargo ships. And finally, they arrive in Italy and face a whole new venture of trying to obtain asylum or some form of legality that will permit them to stay in Europe. Many refugees and immigrants are using Italy as a transit point to other Northern European countries. In this way, Italy's role is complex because it acts as both a destination country and a gateway for the rest of Europe. The goal of this evening's dialogue is to discuss the issue of immigration and how it affects people on the ground, Italian citizens' perception on immigration, and what efforts governmental agencies and NGOs are making to aid these refugees. Now I have the privilege of introducing our panelists. Beat Schuler is the Senior Protection Officer for the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees. Flavio Giacomo is the Public Information Officer and Spokesperson of the International Organization for Migration Rome Office. And Christopher Hein is the Director and Founder of the Italian Council for Refugees. Thank you all for being here tonight. The media portrays the current influx of immigration as an unprecedented crisis. I'd like to begin by asking our panelists if they think this is true. Who would like to begin?
Yeah, good evening, everybody. And the question I try to answer. When we look what is happening exactly today, what happened on the weekend. On the weekend, Saturday and Sunday, and I have to look quickly at the figures. Some 1,856 persons have arrived. Today and tomorrow, they are scheduled disembarkation of refugees and migrants, another 3,800 today and tomorrow. So that brings the figure for the 4 days, 11th of April till the 14th of April, up to 5,600 refugees and migrants. That's a lot. We had last year 170,000 arrivals here in Italy. That was 4 times more than they were in 2013. So we have a sharp rising from 2013 to 2014. We are now in the running of the 2014, and we are certainly at the same level as last year, record level last year, but we may be even higher. We will see. The travel season has only started. We did not have a lot of arrivals during March. March was a very stormy weather, and we did not observe departures, very few arrivals. Claudia has mentioned already that there were some shipwrecks at the beginning of the year, January and February. 500 person or more lost their lives already. And when we look at the total figure of the arrivals for this year, we are currently at 18,500 persons. That's including the arrivals of today. So it is a yes.
Yes. And I think, Mr. Giacomo, if you wanted to comment on the role of the IOM and how your work on the ground meeting these refugees affects the media.
Well, I agree with my colleague. It is true. This is an unprecedented crisis. Last year, we registered the arrival of 170,000 migrants. This year, more or less, the trend is similar. So we compare with the last years, it is something that we have never seen. We have been working as IOM in southern Italy, Lampedusa, Sicily, Calabria, and Apulia since 2006. In a framework of the project, which is called Presidium, where we work alongside UNHCR, Save the Children, Italian Red Cross, and we provide legal support to migrants arriving by sea. We monitor the reception conditions, and we support the authority in the identification of the vulnerable groups, because when you are talking about both arriving by sea, we are talking about both carrying on the so-called mixed flows of migrants. So there are asylum seekers, but there are also unaccompanied minors, women victims of trafficking, potential victims of trafficking, also economic migrants. So there is a wide kind of groups that arrive by sea. This year has been very, very intense and will continue to be intense because, of course, we all know what is happening in Libya. We believe, and I think that we all agree on that the main reason behind the increase of arrival last year is the Libya situation, first of all, together with other big crises, for example, the Syrian war. Just to think about the fact that last year, the first nationality were the Syrians with 42,000 migrants, well, asylum seekers arrived last year in Italy, followed by the Eritreans. So people fleeing from wars, from regimes, from persecutions, but also a lot of people coming from West Africa, many of them probably just fleeing from poverty, but not only. We are thinking about the Nigerians. There are some people who are probably fleeing from Boko Haram, or people fleeing from Mali, where the situation is very complicated. But most of the migrants, they have huge problems in Libya because there is a complete unstable situation right there. Life is very dangerous for migrants. They cannot even walk in the streets right now. So it is an unprecedented situation, which is called by this huge crisis opened by the Libyan crisis. It is something that will not end in a short period.
I believe all relevant data have already been provided regarding Italy. But it is also important to have a view on the context in the Mediterranean and the Middle East, to have a view on the figures in the countries neighboring Syria, countries like Jordan, Lebanon, Turkey, Egypt. Yeah. So when we speak about emergencies, or when we speak about unprecedented crisis, this is all relative when you compare to real crisis areas, when you take into account that now the population of Syrian refugees in Lebanon is equivalent to more than 1/4 of the whole Lebanese population, with all what that means for the infrastructure, for the social systems, for water supply, for health system, for schools, and so on and so forth. So we take a common responsibility, I would say, with respect to crisis, where the international community so far has no means and even no plan to come to a solution, or to bring back a situation where it would be possible to return to their home country, like in Eritrea or Somalia, or in Syria, first of all. So, of course, the reply in relation to the present figures of arrivals and of asylum seekers in Italy, yes, we never had after Second World War history in Italy these figures, this is true. But when you compare, I repeat, with the figures in the overall situation, and not so far away, we speak about just 3 hours flight from here, yeah, then you can say, okay, Europe is taking, and Italy also is taking only a very tiny part of the whole of the crisis and refugee and displacement situation.
Okay, so with that being said, do you feel that this issue should be handled on the national or the supranational level? So it sounds like it should be handled on the supranational level. What, in your opinions, do you feel should be done to foster more cooperation among EU member states? And Mr. Hein, I'm sure you could start with that one.
Quickly to say, of course, the first approach on the refugee situation has been and still has to be a global approach, starting from the 1951 Geneva Convention on the Status of Refugees, from the creation of the Office of the High Commissioner for Refugees. These are UN initiatives on a legal level, on an institutional level, and this has to go on. But then the development has been more on the regional levels, in the African continent, in the Americas, and certainly in the European Union or in Europe as a whole. So where you really have now a shift from the, you may say, from the global level to the regional level, and first of all, a responsibility of such a powerful body like the European Union. And the European Union, we will come maybe a little bit later in this discussion on the theme, to our mind, has not so far taken sufficient responsibility, in particular also regarding the arrivals in the Mediterranean Sea and the operations for search and rescue. So as a representative of the Italian Council for Refugees, we are, of course, normally very critical to the Italian government. This is our role as an NGO, as always everywhere in the world. But we have to say here that when the Italian government is claiming that Europe is not doing sufficiently to support also Italy, also, for example, during this weekend, which Bert Schuler has described so dramatically over the last 3 days or 4 days, then these are only Italian operations, Italian ships, Italian navies, together with some commercial ships, and in good coordination. But there is no real European initiative, and there is no real European initiative to allow people, and we come maybe in a moment to this other theme, to allow people who are in need of protection to arrive here in a regular and a legal and a protected manner, and to have an alternative to this way of coming by boats and risking their lives.
Yes, I would like to come back a little bit and talk about the numbers and the fact that this is an emergency. It is absolutely true what Mr. Hein said. But I would like also to underline the fact that we are talking about last year the arrival of 170,000 migrants. So nothing comparable with 1 million of Syrian refugees who flee in Turkey and Lebanon. But also, let's think about one other thing. 170,000 migrants are arriving in Europe, which is an area with a population of 500 million people. So this is not actually an emergency in terms of numbers per se. This is a humanitarian emergency because those people are arriving by sea. They risk their lives by sea. Last year, we estimate that more than 3,200 migrants died in the Mediterranean. This year already 480 or 500 more or less. These are just optimistic estimates, unfortunately, because we know how many people arrive, but we don't know how many people actually leave the Libyan coasts. And this is a humanitarian emergency also because these migrants, they fall in the hands of these unscrupulous smugglers. These criminal networks, maybe we're going to talk about that a little bit later. And it is also an operational emergency for the Italian government because we are talking about 170,000 migrants entering in Italy from one single entry point, which is the Channel of Sicily. So it's very complicated to save lives at sea. It's very dangerous even for the officer of the Coast Guard. And it's very complicated to provide adequate assistance to 5,600 refugees or migrants arriving in just one weekend in Sicily or maybe Calabria, Puglia, in just a few ports, 5, 6, 7 ports, no more than that. So imagine how it is difficult for the Italian Italian government. So we have to say that both the Italian Maritime Force, like the Coast Guard, Italian Navy, and Italian government, we cannot be critical in that case, in this occasion, because they are doing an excellent job. And in this case, we think that the response to this humanitarian emergency should be European, because this is the Mediterranean Sea. We are talking about human rights, and so Italy must not be left alone.
I would also say that several levels have to be taken into considerations when we look at the refugee and migrant situation. First of all, we have an extreme crisis situation. It has been mentioned. We have Syria still producing daily new refugees, and people have to leave Syria to come to safe countries. And as Christopher Hein mentioned, 95% of the Syrians, and that are almost 4 million refugees, are staying in the neighboring countries. I have here a graphic. We can distribute that, and you can have a look how the situation is. But 95% of Syrians stay in the region. That means Turkey, Lebanon, Jordan, Iraq, also Egypt. These are the refugee receiving countries. 5% of the Syrians have come to Europe. So it's a bit more than 200,000, still very few compared to what the region carries and what the region is trying to help and assist for the Syrians. When I say we have this global situation, we see that the Syrian situation is ongoing. There are not enough efforts to forge peace agreements. I would basically say it's the absence. There are no serious negotiations going on to have a peace so that refugees can start to go back to Syria. We are in year 4 of the crisis. The crisis is ongoing. The refugees in the region, they are fed off. They have stayed in the region, first of all, to see if they can go back quickly. Everybody wants to go back to his country of origin, where he or she is coming from. The same for the Syrian refugees. Now in year 4 or longer of the crisis, they are getting fed off and they say we cannot stay. This is no future. To stay in a refugee camp is no future. We want to come to Europe. We want to go to the United States, to Australia, to other countries, and they look for such possibilities. There are no legal possibilities to come to these countries, and that's why, as my colleague Flavio mentioned, they have to take the help of smugglers and come on the risky way over the Mediterranean Sea. So we have this situation, the global crisis situation ongoing. We have a situation also in Eritrea. There is basically a dictatorship. There is no change on the horizon. Also Eritrea continues to produce refugees. Somalia, ongoing. Nowadays, Kenya talks exactly these days that they want to close one of the biggest refugee camps in the world. It's the Dadaab refugee camp, which is at the border inside Kenya, but at the border with Somalia. There live about 350,000 to 400,000 refugees live there. It's a city, it's a big city, basically in the desert. Kenya is fed off because of the problems with the terrorist organizations, which some of them may harbor within refugee camps, because it's obviously very difficult to police a refugee camp of 400,000 persons. So Kenya wants to close this camp, and that would mean that some people would probably go back to Somalia, but others would also have to leave Kenya because it's not anymore a safe place for refugees, and they will go on the way, come towards Libya and other countries, and will certainly also try to continue to come over. So we have this global situation ongoing where there is a lot of diplomatic efforts needed to try to forge peace agreements and basically to help to prevent that people have to flee away. So this is this situation. When I look at the situation, and Christopher Hein has mentioned it, in the Mediterranean Sea. Migrants and refugees are crossing. It's a fact. They will continue to cross. It is clear that a humanitarian operation is needed. Mare Nostrum was such a humanitarian operation which the Italians generously have created after the big ship disasters near Lampedusa on the 3rd of October in 2013. So Mare Nostrum came. Mare Nostrum existed 1 year, has saved over 100,000 persons' life. Yes, there are some people, they say this is a pull factor. Mare Nostrum attracts more refugees. But when we look again at the figures, the refugees are around. They are pushed out from Syria, they're pushed out from Eritrea. It's a push factor, and it's a fact that they go on the way and that Europe needs to come up with a significant humanitarian search and rescue action in the Mediterranean Sea. Having said this, Frontex is not big enough, it's not significant enough. Maybe we can talk on this a little bit later. And something bigger is needed. Mare Nostrum was much bigger than the Frontex operation, which is a joint operation by the European states.
So would you say that the solution, or a possible solution for would be to bring back Italy's Mare Nostrum and have the EU member states fund it together as a joint operation?
Certainly, there is a need to have something like that, absolutely. And I will just finish by quickly talking about the arrival situation. The arrival situation at the moment, we have Greece and we have Italy at the forefront where the migrants and refugees are arriving. And it can't be that these two states, because we have a Dublin regulation and other EU regulation, that these two states are responsible and have to host everybody. So we need also on the arrival situation a mechanism to share responsibility between European states, and European states have to help each other to take up and assist Italy and Greece in this situation. Sorry, I was a bit long.
No, it's okay, it's okay. So I guess the next question would be, again, going back to the European Union's Operation Triton, which has been criticized for not being as efficient as Mare Nostrum. Would it be possible for Italy to bring back Mare Nostrum and have the EU member states fund it? Since it is not just, I think the burden sometimes falls on the coastal states because, again, they are the countries receiving this influx of migrants, and through EU policy, it's the first country that they are registered in that is the responsibility of that member state. With that being said, additionally, could the EU implement a distribution system where the burden falls on the entire EU and not just on the coastal states?
Well, if so, I mean, Mare Nostrum was terminated on at the end of November 2014. Many people said that it was a pull factor. I remember that the UK government took the decision not to take part in the Frontex Triton operation because, according to them, saving lives at sea is a pull factor, which is absolutely crazy, of course. Well, since the end of Mare Nostrum, the majority, migration flows to Europe by sea have remained the same. I mean, even little, there was an increase in January and February, a decrease in March, and once again now an increase. So if you look at the numbers, more or less the same people arrived this year, more or less are the same people who arrived last year. And Mare Nostrum was in place at the time. So Mare Nostrum is not a pull factor. It is clear now, should be clear to everyone. But it is needed. It is needed because the Italian Coast Guard, which is carrying out the majority of rescue operations at sea, doesn't have the means to save all these people. Last year, Mare Nostrum saved 85,000 migrants through many rescue operations, and the Italian Coast Guard rescued about 40,000 migrants, and the commercial ships, they rescued 43,000 migrants, which is a lot. So this year, there is a gap there. We missed the capacity of saving these 85,000 migrants. I remember that in 2011, the Italian Coast Guard was in charge of the majority of rescue operation. At the end of the year, saved a total of 60,000 migrants, 62,000. People fleeing from the Libyan war and people arriving from Tunisia as a consequence of the Arab Spring. So the Italian Coast Guard can do an excellent job, but it will not be enough. So it is needed. Something like Mare Nostrum, it is needed, and we think as IUM that the European Union should do more. We don't know if actually it will be done, because apparently there is a lack of political will. And many European member states do not agree in doing that. I think that someone will have to move sooner or later, because there are too many deaths already, almost 500, as we already said before. Last year, in the same period, 50 people. So there is a difference. The Italian Navy ships last year could rescue a lot of people because they were patrolling for many days the Mediterranean, so they could rescue 1, 2, 3, 4 boats, even 800 migrants sometimes, in just a few days, and then bring them on the mainland. Now an Italian Coast Guard ship, they can go out, save 1, 2, 3 boats maximum, because the Italian Navy ships are very small, and so they have to come back to Lampedusa or to Sicily to bring these people on the mainland, and then go out again if there are other calls of distress. It is not bearable. I mean, we are just in March. We expect many other migrants to arrive. As Beat said, other crises are unfortunately may develop in the future. And something must be done in order to convince the European member state to do something more. The Mediterranean is an international European sea. Frankly, we do not know what to expect. We are working a lot as IOM. We are advocating for the European Union to move, but we don't really know what to expect about the fact that this operation will be carried out in a more EU concerted way. It is also true that this lack of interest, let's see, of the European Union is completely difficult to understand, because, I mean, it is not intervening in the Mediterranean doesn't stop the migrants, and we have also to say one thing: migration is here to stay. Well, we are experiencing these migration flows, but let's be clear: in the next 10, 20, 30 years to come, these flows will not decrease. Now there are so many people arriving because of this international crisis, because of Libya, Syria, etc. But as a matter of fact, the pressure from Africa, especially from Africa to Europe, will not decrease. Just think that in the next 30 years, the European population, the working age population in Europe will decrease of 23%. But it will increase about 3 times in Africa. So it is needed that the European Union should start thinking about long-term solutions in order to handle the migration issue, which is not a problem, it can also be a resource, and it is a resource in many ways. Let's think about Italy. It's something different. We're not talking about flows right now. But in Italy, there are 5 million migrants who contribute to 12% of the Italian GDP. Of course, migration flows are different because there are people who are forced to leave and they are desperate. But nonetheless, migration in all this form is something that must be addressed in a more current, concerted, and long-term way.
Thank you. Now I'd like to ask, focusing more on when they arrive, and Mr. Hein, this question may be geared towards your organization. What is the dividing line between immigrants who are granted asylum and those that are not? And furthermore, how rigid is that line?
Well, you know, the international community has decided quite some time ago to provide international protection to refugees, not to provide international protection to economic migrants. More than 150 states of the world have ratified the 1951 Geneva Convention on Refugees. But very few states have ratified the 1990 New York Convention on the Right of Migrants and their Families. And in Europe, no receiving country has ratified that convention. So we have to bear in mind that there is a clear legal line set. You may question in detail the definition of the refugee that has been, as you may know, in the European Union enlarged with the concept of the subsidiary protection. That means also people who need protection without falling under the more narrow terms and definition of the refugee, according to the Geneva Convention, have on equal foot now protection in Europe. But even so, this does not include, of course, migrants for economic reasons, does not include migrants for ecological reasons, and there is precisely, let's say, the borderline. No. But it is important to remember that all this is, of course, an evolution. You know. 20 years ago, nobody could think about even that you would have an agreement on a supranational agreement on subsidiary protection. Yeah. This is a result of an evolution. It is a result also of a debate, of pressure, exercised, for example, by public opinion, by non-governmental organizations, by civil society, sometimes also a result of jurisprudence, of judges. There was an evolution. So where do we stand now? We speak with an ugly word about mixed migration flows. That means you have on the same boat, as Flavio Di Giacomo already mentioned, you have on the same boat people who are clearly in need of international protection, and you have others who are not. There must be, for the time being, a clear distinction. Otherwise, you would risk not to provide protection to those who really need it. My opinion, and the opinion of my organization, is that we cannot just say, okay, they are all the same. Yeah? And we have to make a distinction if somebody is able or not able to return to her or his home country at any moment. A refugee cannot, and a migrant in principle can. This is the distinction to be made. But when you speak about the growing number of ecological migrants or refugees, there's not yet a clear term what they are, and maybe take those who are forced to leave some islands in the Pacific, because the level of the sea has grown up and they have no habitat anymore on their island, so they cannot return. So this is a situation where you, to my mind, you must say, okay, this is at least a refugee-like situation, because the distinction is, can a person return or can he or she not return freely in conditions of safety, in conditions of actual possibility of survival. Those who arrive from North Africa, in particular from Libya, over the last weeks were mainly people from sub-Saharan African countries, not from the Middle East, surprisingly. It seems today, but IOM has a more clear observatory on it, that more people from the Middle East are now arriving at the Greek island, and a growing number also is taking the route through Bulgaria and the Balkans and arriving by surface. Also in Italy, in the northeastern part of Italy, at the Gorizia border with Slovenia. These are also trends which are linked to a mechanism of contrast, of surveillance, but also of organization of these smuggling enterprises, if you want to call them in this way, who know quite well where the better opportunities are, where it is for them less costly to go. So there is a steady movement. In all this movement, you have to take into account that those who arrive from African countries in this period are certainly from very different situation when you speak about a country like Gambia or Ghana or Senegal on the one hand, or if you speak about people coming from South Sudan, from the Central African Republic, or from Eritrea, so in part really conflict areas, or in the case of Eritrea, a human rights standard which is so bad, yeah, that it is for a young person almost impossible to remain in their own country.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Giacomo, Mr. Schuler, would you like to comment?
Yeah. Well, it is true. There are many different nationalities arriving. I'm just checking in main nationalities, the top 5 most represented nationalities in 2015. And there are Gambia, Senegal, Somalia, Syria, and Mali. So the first nationality is Gambia. I've been several times in Lampedusa and in Sicily this year, and I met several migrants. And actually, the point is, the situation here now is very complicated because Libya, as I told before, is a country where, which has become unsafe for all the migrants, especially for sub-Saharan migrants. I spoke to many migrants who told me that they knew that they could die in the desert, and many, unfortunately, they do. We don't know how many, but a lot, maybe more than the people who are dying in the Mediterranean. They know they can die at sea, but they never expected to experience what they had experienced in Libya. Once they arrive in Libya, the situation is changes completely. Some Gambians told me that when they arrived there, it's like when you're in Libya, you are between the devil and the deep blue sea, literally. And it was a Gambian guy who told me that. Because when they arrive, you know, the migrants, they start working in Libya because Libya has always been a country where who received a lot of foreign workers. And but now when they work, usually they can not be paid, or they just paid half of their salary. They cannot protest. If they protest, they can be beaten. They can be killed. If they walk in the street, people can ask for money, and if they don't give the money, they can be again beaten or killed without any specific reason. These are testimonies, of course. We are not there in this moment, but this is an extremely terrible situation. And once they realize they cannot live safely in the country, they are forced to come to Europe because they do not have any chance. Let's think about a Gambian guy who's in Zuara or on a Libyan coastal area. He cannot go back because he would risk his life. I mean, he will be scared of being killed. So there are the criminal organizations are very well organized in this moment in the country because there is a complete chaos and anarchy. And so those migrants are often approached by intermediators of the smugglers, people of the same nationalities of the migrants, or offer them the possibility to pay for a sea crossing. And so they do it. But once they pay, another kind of hell begins because they are taken in these so-called connection houses, these kind of terrible facilities of 150 square meters, where the smugglers gather 100 people, more or less. There is only one toilet or two toilets. We have been told that sometimes the smuggler asks for more money inside these facilities, and again, if they don't have this money, they beat the migrants. Many times they rape the women. And once they are gathered in these connection houses, when the smuggler decided it's time to leave, they bring the migrants to the beach to embark them to these unworthy vessels, which is increasingly unworthy and unsafe. And if migrants then, once on the beach, they realize that they change their mind because they are scared about the sea, of the weather conditions, of the conditions of the boats, because they understand it's too risky for them, then they cannot change their mind. Once you pay, you cannot go back. That's what they told me. So they're forced to get on board with knives, with sticks, with guns. I've actually seen migrants with scars on the arms because they were cut by the smugglers who forced them to get on board. And these vessels, for example, from Libya, many times the smugglers use this wooden fishing boat with two different areas, the hull without windows, with the engine, that of course it's very dangerous because the migrants can breathe the fumes of the engine and can die asphyxiated, which unfortunately happens very often, and there is a deck. And the sub-Saharan migrants, they're all forced to get on board in a hull. And they even don't have the possibility to buy a life jacket that sometimes the other nationalities can buy for $100. It depends. It's not a specific price. But the sub-Saharan migrants often they cannot have even the right to pay for a life jacket because they're considered object. So what we can say about these migrants? In our opinion, this is a violation of the human rights. That's it. So all the migrants who are now in Libya, we can consider them all vulnerable. Of course, there are the asylum seekers, people fleeing from war. Once you are there, you are considered, we must consider you a vulnerable migrant. So it is very complicated now. People are arriving in Italy. It is true that many of them, they were not forced to leave from their own country because they are economic migrants, but in Libya they become vulnerable. And in this moment, we are even meeting migrants for whom the Libya was a country of transit. They wanted to come to Europe from the beginning, but there are also many migrants who have been living in Libya for many years, who at the end of the day, they decided to leave the country because they couldn't live there anymore because it was too unsafe. So it's a very complicated situation. And the vulnerability is huge. Of course, we cannot provide protection to people who are fleeing from Libya because, of course, those are people who, in theory, could come back to go back to their own countries of origin, because there are no wars or etc. But once again, maybe we are going to talk about that, about the difficult the problems and how it is difficult for a migrant to be repatriated, to be returned to this country of origin without the consent of his consulate, of the embassy. And there are also other vulnerable groups that, according to the Italian legislation, can be provided with some kind of protection. As an example, we are thinking about the potential victims of trafficking. Last year, we have registered the arrival of about 1,500 women from Nigeria. In 2013, 300. In 2014, 1,500. In the framework of this project, Presidium IUM established 2 anti-trafficking teams who are trying to talk to the women arriving by sea in order to understand if they are victims of trafficking. Many of them are, especially the Nigerians. They come all from the same region of Nigeria, which is the Edo state. They are convinced to come to Italy to work as hairdresser, for example, and they are offered, they don't have to pay for the journey. But during the journey, unfortunately, they start to understand that the real aim of their journey is to be sexually exploited once arrived in Italy. But unfortunately, they are manipulated because they are forced to attend, I don't know, these voodoo rituals or juju rituals as they are called. So they are manipulated, and once they arrive here, they don't want to talk and to admit they have been trafficked because they are they are ashamed, but they think that they have to do that because of these rituals. And but when they do, they have the right to get a protection in Italy, even without announcing their exploiter. Italy, in this case, has a very advanced legislation. And so we are trying to do our best in order to help these women. And so there are more vulnerabilities among the migrants arriving by sea.
Thank you. And so I think with that, it's interesting because you have these large amounts of economic, ecological, and also refugees arriving in Italy. I think the next question, and Mr. Schuler, if you want to take this one first, what is the perception by Italian citizens on immigration, and how does that affect your job?
I think we have to look at different years, at different periods. One is the Berlusconi area, and we had there a very negative perception and a very negative attitude. We had also some pushbacks happening during that time. That means 2009, 2010, boats arriving, they have been taken by the Italian Coast Guard, have been turned around and have been sent back to Libya. We have there now a European Court of Justice decision. It's the Hirsi decision, which is a groundbreaking decision. Has been clearly stated that no state, Italy cannot do it, no European state can just take a boat and turn it back and to send people back, for example, to Libya, where the human rights situation is clearly not guaranteed for these refugees and migrants. So that was this, I would call it the Berlusconi area. We had then a change which we have observed, and this change came especially with these horrible boat accidents in Lampedusa in 2013. We had there the 3rd of October event with about 350 migrants drowning just 1 kilometer outside of Lampedusa, this horrible accident. And 2 weeks later, another accident there. This accident has created a big wave of solidarity in Italy, has made a change, and has then also led to the Mare Nostrum operation, which in my view was largely supported by the Italian public opinion. I would say Italy has shown there a big heart, an open mind, and has changed its attitude and has welcomed migrants and has helped and assisted to take them on shore in a safe way. Now we see a little bit an exhaustion with 170,000 arrival last year and ongoing situation here at the moment this year also with a lot of arrivals. We see also some clearly some public opinion shifting. Italy is still in an economical crisis. Some political parties, they clearly underline that Italy is in crisis. Italy cannot afford to help and assist more migrants. Italy is alone with the costs, which is not true because Europe pays a lot towards this cost. So we see there a fluctuation of the public opinion. I would say, I don't know how others see that.
The Northern Eight, perhaps.
Well, I am a spokesperson, I work with communication, so it's a problem actually. It's a problem. It is true that something has changed after the shipwreck of October 2013. It is also true that this shift of opinion is now again changing. The idea is, okay, poor migrants, they die at sea, okay, they should stay at home. That's the solution for many people, unfortunately. Politically, yes, it's true. We have the right-wing parties have always been against migration. Migration has been treated like an electoral issue, which is a big mistake, of course, because migration is a political issue that will affect all our countries in Europe, at least for the, as I told before, the years to come. And I think that also the left-wing parties, they are not carrying out this, they are not approaching this issue with the right approach. Because on one side, the right wing, they are just criticizing that. The left wing, they have this kind of humanitarian attitude, which is correct, but migration is more than that. Migration is a political issue that must not be seen like, oh, poor migrants, we have to help them. It's not enough. It's not that. It's something that the politics must be worked on too, because it involves the issues of very delicate issues for people, because the issues of culture, the issue of identity, the issue of nation. So it's something that must be approached in a very comprehensive way with long-term strategies. Unfortunately, our politicians, they just work for the next 6 months to come. That's it. They don't have a long-term view. And this is a problem that unfortunately is going to affect our country for a long time, I guess.
Well, as you know, there is not one Italy. You have different regions, you have different cultures, you have different level of economic development, of social development, you have different levels of unemployment. And what is, from a first sight, strange to see, that in the northern regions of Italy, that means the richer ones and the more developed ones, where you have less reception centers for refugees and asylum seekers, far less than in the south, more hostile or xenophobic attitudes are more frequent than in the poorer south. This is one element which is very interesting to note. Take other important immigration and asylum countries in Europe, like Germany. You have had the day before Easter, brutal attack on a reception house for asylum seekers. You have had a total of more than 150 smaller attacks during the last year on housing and centers for migrants and asylum seekers in Germany. But this does not mean that you have overall a hostile environment, or that you have a rejection from the majority of the public opinion. The public opinion, for example, in Germany reacted very positively to an opening, to have a quota for legal arrival of on resettlement, as kind of resettlement of Syrian refugees. There was a strong support in public opinion on it. And I would say also in Italy, one should not overestimate the importance of the Northern League or other similar voices. These are minority parties, but you have a little bit everywhere in Europe. We do not have in Italy a situation like in France. France and UK are the real critical countries in this moment, in particular UK, because there you have very xenophobic parties which have more than 20% of seats in the parliament. This is a different situation. This is not the Italian situation. And I think it is not so much related also to the numbers of arrivals. People need to know that there is a government of the phenomenon, and that there is a good cause also for reception and for also investing on integration of these persons. And this is not sufficiently done. When you compare the situation in Italy with other countries in Europe, longer-standing immigration countries, you do not see so easily, in countries like also Germany or Switzerland, so many poor migrants on the street. The social exclusion, which is so apparent, so visible, in the bigger cities in Italy. This causes effects which are sometimes, yes, hostile, or at least come to the point that there is a view, that there is a public perception that there are two different words, we and them. We and them, they are different. They are different apparently, not only because they have a different color of skin, not so much this, but they are socially different and they are culturally different, and this is perceived in this way. So there is a lot to do, and not so much has been done, but it is also now the question, where we have in Italy regional elections at the end of May, 31st of May. It is true that here and there migration is becoming again a theme in the electoral campaign. The debate is if on the central governmental level, and I speak really about the President of the Council of Ministers, should or not regard immigration and refugee affairs at one of the hot points in the public debate in this moment. And Mr. Renzi does not. He does not speak about migration at all, or almost at all. This may be a good decision. It may be a good decision, to speak about economy, to speak about jobs, to speak about social systems, and so on and so forth, but not to speak about what is in the news each and every day of arrivals from Africa and so on. It is not for the central government so much a theme. So this cools the debate down. And if you want my opinion also, speaking to a lot of journalists, I have got the impression that this is maybe the better line, in this moment, the better line to do so, and not to overheat a debate. And then you must say also that there is on the way an improvement also in the reception system in Italy. There is a more organized governance of the whole phenomenon, in particular in the field of asylum and refugees, which is far from being sufficient, and it comes far too late, but there is at least a beginning of, let's say, a sign that there is a management on what is going on, and not just a laissez-faire. It's not our business as a government to do. So on the one hand, you have action on the governmental level, also on the legislative level right now. You have action, but on the other hand, you have an approach which is not to, let's say, to make this as a again emergency theme. Last observation to it: what the civil society, and this is important, the Catholic, the Christian, church-linked organizations, but also trade unions and not church-linked organizations that are very active in the whole of the reception system, integration measures on a local level, extremely active and important. And there is actually a problem with respect to the relationship between the non-governmental sector and the institutional and governmental sector on all levels. And this has a negative effect also on having a common line to combating racism and xenophobia, I repeat, in particular in the northern part of the country.
Thank you. And so I think the last question I wanted to ask is, before we open the floor up to the audience questions, is you mentioned, Mr. Hein, earlier, as did your colleagues, about an alternative. So what would be a possible alternative for refugees to arrive in Italy without having to make the treacherous journey across the sea? Mr. Schuler, I don't know.
There are different models are around, and these days under discussion, under consideration. One of the models is to have what they call kind of transit stations in North African countries. Under discussion is, for example, Morocco, Tunisia, Egypt, Niger, to have some centers where there would be refugee status determination taking place, and those who have passed the test, who are accepted as refugees, they would be taken, they would be resettled and would be taken to Europe. So these people would not have to make the dangerous journey over the Mediterranean Sea. So this concept, I would say, they could happen one day. I think we are about 5 years away in my view. It needs a lot of preparations, agreements, diplomatic agreements. The countries where such centers would be hosted will have to agree, obviously. Tunisia would have to agree, Morocco would have to agree. If these centers would be working in the way these days people think, it's difficult to say, and only the experience would show if they work in the end, and if they also would be taking a lot of people, so that people not are just passing the centers and say, we don't want to have to do, we anyway go on the boat and we don't need to stop here, it's only an unnecessary stop. So that would be a kind of an alternative, of a legal way to have a kind of resettlement to Europe countries under certain conditions.
Yeah, very complicated though. It's true, some kind of legal entry channels to Europe must be found. The improvement of resettlement programs, which is, I don't know if you're familiar with resettlement programs, maybe Mr. Hein can explain something about that, because...
We have here the special...
Oh, yeah. Well, these programs who are actually carried out by UNHCR together with some states like United States of America, Australia, some European member states. Essentially, these governments, they just go to the refugee camps in a country of first asylum and they select the most vulnerable groups and they transfer them to their own country. For example, United States each year has a quota of about 40,000, 50,000 refugees per year. It's the biggest refugee resettlement country, yes, the USRP, United States Resettlement Program. And unfortunately, Europe is not doing enough. Only a few countries are carrying out good resettlement programs, like Sweden, Norway, UK since 8-9 years. Other countries, Italy, so far I just tried a few times some ad hoc initiatives. Let's see what happens next year. But it is not enough. So many refugees could be resettled, and this could be an alternative offer to those migrants instead of risking their lives at sea, crossing the desert. It is not a solution, just an alternative. The solution would be to provide alternatives, to also improve family reunification mechanisms, because there are so many migrants who are trying to join their relatives who are in Europe, for example. And sometimes even providing alternatives in a country where they are. For example, I've been talking with many associations of migrants who said that, for example, in Ethiopia or in other countries, there are those young people living in these huge camps that they do not have anything to do from morning to evening for years and years. So at the end of the day, this is not a life, that they decide to risk their lives in order to find something better. And if some kind of initiative could be started in this country of first asylum in order to provide at least something to do there, could be another kind of alternative. Anyway, it's very complicated. It's something that needs the support of the country of transit, which is not easy. And there are also some security issues, because if you set up these transit centers, they also become targets of violence, for example, because the security is a huge problem in many camps, even in Dadaab, for example, etc. So there are many issues that must be tackled, but something can be done, but must be done by concerted initiatives which can be carried out together by European member states and the country of transit. But something actual, something practical, not all the nice declaration statements that we have heard so far.
Mr. Hein with the NGO perspective.
Well, my organization for the last 15 years has as a first priority to promote everything which would reduce the number of dead persons in the Mediterranean Sea, and which would reduce the necessity of people who are asking for having asylum or international protection to be obliged to use these illegal channels of arriving in Europe. And if, as from 2012, we have a resettlement program of the European Union, we have a financial incentive for member states who are embarking on resettlement. And even considering, as Flavio de Giacomo said, that it is on a voluntary basis and not obligatory for member states to join this program. And the total level is far from the level of the US still today. Nevertheless, there is a way forward. Yeah, there is, let's say, to see that there is growing awareness that Europe cannot just allow itself, that each and every day people are dying out there in the Mediterranean Sea. And this takes time, of course, but as a civil society organization, we are impatient, and we say, okay, you cannot just wait more time. Yeah, and we say this also to the international organizations. they had a lot of time now, to think about models. And we cannot say today, okay, let's see long-term preparation and so. No. Today we have to act. We have to act. And that means to act not necessarily only or to start with on the basis of centers or so in the transit countries. The Undersecretary of the Ministry of Interior last week made a mission to Niger, and the next week he will be in Sudan, and he is negotiating with the governments of these two countries to allow to have these processing centers in the countries, rather than to think about the delegations of the European Union in these and other transit countries allow people to present an asylum request to the embassies and consulates of the member states, or directly also to the delegations of the European Union, which is a kind of embassy of the Union. And to work on this theme together with international organizations and also with international non-governmental organizations. This is what we are going for. Parallel, of course, to a broadening up of resettlement programs, a broadening up of the family reunification schemes, of humanitarian admission and of humanitarian evacuation where it is necessary to do so. But all these, where is the distinction? One thing is on resettlement, you have a generosity of a government, to say, okay, I put aside 10,000 resettlement places, but the refugee has no right to be included in such a program. There's no individual right to it. But when you give the right to present a protection request, not only in the territory, but also outside in a transit country, in some instances even in a country of origin, then of course you have no quota, you have no real control how many people would make use of it, but you have a right to the people. And even if you are rejected, you can find a mechanism today also on the use of communication technologies, that you have Skype interviews, that you have interviews with the Central Asylum Authority, and you have maybe also a hearing with a judge in the case of a rejection where you can make an appeal to. So there are possibilities now that we did not have 10 years ago, and not yet there is really a proposal to explore these possibilities. What is clear to me and to many other NGOs in the European context is that we cannot still, like we said today in the press communique of my organization, really again to say we are very sad that other 9 people died this morning or last night 80 miles away from the Libyan coast, and tomorrow we will say the same thing, and the day after tomorrow we will say the same thing again, so we have to act.
Thank you. And with that, I would like to open up the floor to questions.
I'm the first to take the floor, so let me congratulating you for this wonderful conversation. But I'd like to do a step back. And as long as we, European Union, international community, or whatever, don't face the reason why these migrants are fleeing from those countries, I think that we cannot solve this problem, this crisis that is a direct consequence of another one. So my question is what the international community should do in countries like Syria or Libya to face. Thank you.
This is a central question, of course, the question about the so-called root causes of forced migration and also of labor migration, or poverty migration, if you want to say. And what to do to combat the root causes and to address the root causes prior to the necessity to migrate. But very often this argument to combat the root causes is used in order not to address the situation of those who are actually forced to flee from their countries or to go away. Take the situation of Somalia. In Somalia, you have a conflict situation as from 1990. This is now 25 years. No? In 25 years, the international community has, the UN has sent troops to Somalia. This ended very badly. Somebody may remember, in the middle of the 90s. All kind of conferences, talks, military constructions, economic constructions were done. And what is the result? Today, Well, you just saw it some days ago in the horrible terrorist attack in Kenya, yeah, done by Somali Islamist forces. So, take Syria. Is done anything to address the root causes for the exodus of millions of Syrian refugees? Starting from the US government to the UN, to the European governments, we do not see any, even not an idea, how to bring back peace to Syria. So that's very theoretical. And then, of course, may I anticipate, when you speak to the UNHCR, to the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, he will tell you, okay, this is not really my business. This is a political issue, not a humanitarian one. Yeah. And you speak to the IOM, and the IOM will say, okay, this is not really our business because we have no means to intervene on the root causes. But then who is able to intervene? This brings us to the very, very weak situation of the United Nations and as a political instrument of the very weak situation of the Security Council. Where is the Security Council to combat the root causes? So I'm very sorry, from my point of view, I can answer your question only with questions.
My question is about how the responsibility should be delegated among nations in the EU when it comes to rescue operations in the Mediterranean. Should it be sort of a financial obligation, or should they bring in more people from more sort of rescue teams from various EU nations in order to help with this issue?
Well, both. I mean, if we want to come back to a mechanism that would be similar to the Mare Nostrum, well, we need financial means, because Mare Nostrum had a monthly cost of 10 million euros, which was a lot. So financial means are needed, and at the same time also other means, ships, personnel, officer, etc. Because Italy cannot provide all these ships, all this money like it did last year. So I think that a mechanism should be put in place. Of course, it will not be compulsory, probably will be on a voluntary basis, but if so, both these things are needed, because of course, if more means are needed, more money is needed, and we think that in this moment, search and rescue operation must be carried out in international waters, not only 30 miles of the Italian coast, but more closer to the Libyan coast or coastal area, with means, with ships patrolling the Mediterranean capable to rescue all the boats in distress that they find, which is a very, very expensive operation. And we need ships, helicopters, planes, etc. So it is something that must be done as a whole by European member states that would like to participate to this operation.
Yeah, just quickly looking at the Frontex situation report. Just to give you the example how Frontex these days work, the European Border Guard, with the Triton operation. Basically, there is one ship from Iceland in the operation. There are 3 Maltese ships. The Maltese are anyway there and do have to do search and rescue within their area where they are responsible for. Then we do have a boat from Holland, from the Netherlands, and that's it already. Then we have the Italian Guardia di Finanza, and they are with vessels also in the Frontex Triton operation. So clearly, where are the others? Where are the French? Where are the Spaniards? Where are the Portuguese vessels? Other vessels, they are not here. So the European solidarity is a very shy, small, little child which needs to be growing up, needs to be fed, needs to be stronger and more meaningful, and there needs to be a political will that this is happening. At the moment, we do not see that. So it's the absence of the ways and means and of the solidarity, and also not enough finances to beef the operation up. That's what we think.
Do you think that some of the North African nations have a responsibility as well to join in these rescue operations?
There have been investment into border guards in Libya by Italy. There have been investments by Spain into sorry, not border guards, but coast guards into the system of Morocco. So there is some assistance, but I'm a bit skeptical because this assistance is also done in the perspective that they should basically come out and take the boats back on shore. And as long as we do not have then meaningful asylum systems in these North African countries, I don't think we can talk that the boats have to go back to where they departed from.
So my question is, do you think that the Dublin regulation will be changed in the near future so that the asylum applicants do not have to apply in the first European country they arrive to? Thank you.
The Dublin system started 25 years ago with the Dublin Convention in 1990. Then it was incorporated in the legislation of the European Union with the so-called Dublin II regulation, and as from June 2013 with the Dublin III revised regulation. 4 years of debate between 2009 and 2013 on this revision of the Dublin regulation. This is very short time ago. I don't believe that there is a political will today to reopen the case of Dublin. There will be an evaluation done by the European Commission next year about the functioning of the Dublin system under the new rules of the Dublin III regulation. But presently the debate is different in Europe. The debate is how can we, let's say in a certain way, bypass the extremely negative consequences of the application of the Dublin regulation, and that means how we can ensure the freedom of movement of recognized refugees in the European Union, which is not there. The freedom of movement is limited to tourist stays for up to 90 days, but you cannot take up employment even if you are recognized as a refugee or you have other form of protection in Italy. You cannot go to France and to take up employment. You can eventually do it after 5 years, but this is a very long period of time. And this means, if you have the possibility that after having received a positive decision on your asylum request, you can establish yourself in another member state of the European Union, the meaning of the Dublin regulation would very much come down. The second thing is when we speak about legal access to a European territory, then in this model you would, as from the beginning, already choose your country where to go. You will go to the Swedish embassy as from the beginning because you have relatives in Sweden and you will be shifted to Sweden. There's no need anymore to come to Lampedusa and then to go to Austria and then to go to Germany and someday you may land up in Sweden. So these are the ways, technically spoken, we speak about a proposal for the mutual recognition of positive asylum decisions within the European Union. We believe that this is a cornerstone of the common European asylum system on the one hand, but we speak also about the possibility of reducing the waiting period which is established under the EU regulation for long-term residents, migrants residents for 5 years, as I said, in favor of people in need of international protection, to reduce this to 2 years. This would already mean, really a big step forward, because we see each and every day asylum seekers shifted back to Italy from all other European countries. Their concern is not so much that their asylum request is processed in Italy. They have relatively good chances to get a fair trial, to say so, a fair procedure, and to be recognized if they need it. as refugees or under protection. Their concern is where to live afterwards, where to work afterwards, where to reunite their family afterwards, where to restart a new life in exile afterwards. This is the problem which has to be addressed. And certainly the Dublin regulation is a very, let's say, bureaucratic regulation, which does not take into account at all the individual desires, wishes, and legitimate interest of the person, of the asylum seeker.
Do the migrants who are using, for example, Libya to get to Europe, do they know that they'll end up using these criminal networks or smugglers and be in these really dangerous situations? Or if so, is that just because they have no other choice to do that? Or if they don't know that before they get into Libya, is that part of the problem?
Well, it's quite hard to say, but according to the testimonies, they don't know exactly to what level of violence they will have to face. They know, as I told before, they can die at the desert, they can die at sea, that smugglers are very tough, but they don't expect to be treated in that way because there's simply no reason. When they are in the country of origin, probably they are offered with better prospects about the journey. The point is that when they arrive there, they simply can expect that the women can be raped, they can be beaten without any reason, that people can enter in their houses and just shot them without specific reason, just because they want a few money. No, as far as I know, as far as I can say, the majority of migrants, they do not expect to be treated in that way in Libya.
And is there
Maybe just one word on this. I would say there is a lot of information is around, and some migrants, they have very accurate information on the situation. And we observe especially that the Syrians, some Arabic-speaking networks of smugglers, they have Facebook pages. These pages can be accessed, obviously, and Syrian refugees, they take this information and they evaluate it, they discuss it, they comment it. There's a lot is going on, but obviously it depends. I think Syrians are there more familiar with the modern technology. Eritreans a bit less, because also they have more difficulties to access internet and the modern social networks. And sub-Saharan Africans also more difficulty. So it depends on the level of access to the modern technology.
Yeah, well, social networks are playing a big role right now in this issue. I remember that when we have witnessed this phenomenon of the so-called ghost ships coming from Turkey, well, the Turkish smugglers, they just published their advertisement on Facebook. That just like travel agencies. And another fact is that when I went to Lampedusa last month, there were these unaccompanied minors coming from Eritrea. There was one minor who arrived in Italy. He was 11 years old. He arrived all by himself. And then they were in the island. They had the possibility to go out from the reception center, and they went to a restaurant. And the owner of the restaurant just told them, come inside, I will offer dinner to you. They were so happy, 6 migrants, they were 11, 12 years old, 13 years old. They start to take picture and to send this picture and to post it on Facebook, thing like that. Imagine what kind of powerful message is it for those who stay at home and say, oh, my friend is there, he's in the restaurant, he's in Italy, he's happy, without knowing probably what he's been going through. So social networks may have a very powerful effect. On the same time, they can be used probably to tackle down this phenomenon, but we still have to find out a way. We are working on that. But there is something that we have never experienced before. This is something quite recent.
Thank you very much for this. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the situation in the refugee camp. I mean, obviously there are a lot of people who maybe are not professionals, but there probably are many who are. And can they do something, or could there be any kind of facility or training for people to do something in these years that they're there, or is there something happening? Are they literally sitting around waiting?
You mean in Italy here?
Yeah, in Italy. Educational possibilities, study, or people, for instance, doctors or whatever, practicing their trade.
Right. In Italy, I would say it completely depends. You have all very different type of centers. Some of the centers, they work very well and do have a program, do have a comprehensive program, which lead already the first step on the path to integration. And you do have camps, they are clearly substandard and are not offering any additional social assistance, vocational training, language training, etc. So it depends very much where somebody lands. You do have bigger reception center like Mineo, like Crotone, where you have in Mineo up to 4,000 person at the moment, which is clearly big, and you can imagine then it gets very difficult to provide services to such a big community. And you do have smaller, the SPRAR projects, where you do have, I would say, excellent assistance and a lot of dedicated staff working with asylum seekers in these centers, trying to help them, trying to provide them assistance, psychological help, vocational training, language training, etc., etc. So you have huge fluctuation within the Italian system today.
Thanks for your contribution. I have a question on the legal ways to reach Europe, because I believe that legal ways are the only durable solution to avoid further death at sea. And my question is for you, and also for you, Mr. Hein and Mr. Schuler. And if we analyze the Syrian situation, we see that the EU member states pledges for Syrians are up to 40,000 places. We know that Germany already offered 30,000 places among private sponsorships and humanitarian admissions. But my question is, these 40,000 pledges are just up to 1% if compared to the 4 million refugees in Lebanon and Jordan and Turkey and Egypt. So also considering this new EU fund for integration, asylum, and migration, which are your expectations about this? I mean, do you think that this will increase the number of pledges, or what could be done to advocate with states for more places, because it's really urgent need, I think. Thank you.
Take Italy as an example. Italy never had a resettlement program. Some sporadic and ad hoc experiences were made, also in 2011 during the revolution in Libya. A certain limited number of Eritrean, in particular Eritrean women, were taken over from Libya. Some Palestinian refugees were resettled to Italy. These were not very successful operations, because almost all of them afterwards have left Italy towards other countries. There was not a real integration program, and they were hosted in very far away villages, so people did not feel at all comfortable with their placement and with the conditions. Now Italy is planning very concretely to open a resettlement quota of 500 places, out of whom 450 are reserved for Syrian refugees and 50 for the time being for Eritreans. And this operation will start, let's say, during summer, more or less, in June or July. This is the planning. And this is also on the basis of the fact that the fund you are mentioning, the AMIF fund of the European Union, AMIF, that means Asylum, Migration and Integration Fund, provides financial incentives for member states, which has a range between 6,000 and 10,000 euro per person. In the case of Italy, that for the first time is joining the European Resettlement Program with a quota of 500, and having declared that principally they want to resettle vulnerable persons, so they get from this fund 10,000 euro per person. This is certainly not sufficient for covering all the cost of transfer, accommodation, integration, and so, but it is an important thing. You can say 500 is a ridiculous figure, and it is. It is certainly a ridiculous figure in a certain way. But it is a start, and it is a start in particular for a country which has not really made experiences with resettlement so far. You have to see all this, and this is, let's say, if you may have noticed, it's a question of evolution and of pushing for improvements and for higher standards. The European Council on Refugees and Exiles, ECRE, with headquarters in Brussels, which is reuniting more than 70 NGOs in Europe working for refugees. For Italy, my organization is a member of ECRE. We are speaking now about 130,000 resettlement places for the European Union, and this is following also more or less the figure of the UNHCR, of the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, I understand. It is also true that till 2 years ago we spoke about 100,000 places, and this at that moment 2 years ago, that was considered as an enormous, totally, you can even not dream about 100,000 resettlement places in Europe, whereby now, okay, here and there you are on the road. And you mentioned Germany, and you mentioned, let's say, also parallel programs like the Humanitarian Admission Program, the sponsorship program, and also in Italy. We are reflecting about an experimental, very small sponsorship program just to start with. So something is on the move, to say, even if it is up to now absolutely not a realistic alternative to people who are stuck there in Egypt or in Libya or in Lebanon and need to go away and to go further and to come here. So we are not certainly at the point where you can say, one can make up his or her mind, will I pay the smuggler, or will I put myself in the line and wait that I get a humanitarian visa or resettlement place?
Just briefly, yes, it's a beginning. It's a good beginning. We have to be happy that we have already the pledges of these 40,000 places. Now we have to make sure that these 40,000 places are also very quickly filled and that the person can really move and come. And from that beginning, I think we shall see that there are more places offered by the states, and that there is a political will to offer more places. Just to add one figure, we have heard, yes, we would think UNHCR that 130,000 places would be a good figure for Europe. When I look at the UN Special Rapporteur for Migrants, Professor François Crépeau, the Canadian professor, he argued and advocated that Europe should take 1 million resettlement places over 5 years. I mean, 28 countries over 5 years, 1 million, that would be a significant figure, and that would clearly help to bring some people on the legal path to migration to Europe.
Take one last question.
I was just wondering about the integration system, particularly in Italy. We've lived here for 30 years. We're from South Africa originally. And is there any program to educate the Italians in relation to, it's all very well saving people from the sea and doing the humanitarian things, etc., but I think they stop on the shore. Because the level of understanding in Italy of other cultures, of difference, and particularly of African people of African descent is absolutely phenomenal. I mean, in terms of whether it's gay issues or black issues or women's issues, I mean, Italy on the ground is unbelievably behind on any consciousness on this level, and it's very disturbing to think of all of this going on and all of this concentration literally on the seashore. And then wondering what happens, you know, if people had to actually settle here. No wonder everybody wants to go to other countries. I mean, there's nothing happening. And the level of consciousness in Italy is really, I see you all smiling, but I mean, it is the bottom line. What do we mean in Italy when you mean about integration into this culture without education in the schools? Without some programs, huge money being invested on the Italians, not on the immigrants. Thank you.
You want to take that one?
Yeah, I'm smiling because, as I told you, I'm working with the media, so I know how behind we are on this particular issue. As I was telling before, it's migration involves these very delicate issues of nation, culture, identity. And it's a very young immigration country, though. Just think that we were an immigration country until the 90s, more or less. Then the last 15, 20 years, we became an immigration country all of a sudden. And unfortunately, media did not help. It's a mix of the damage in Italy has been done by both politicians who are just thinking about the next elections and the media, which unfortunately in Italy has been very superficial on this particular issue. No, not only on this, it's true. But since I'm working on this issue, let's say that I can say that they've been behind on this issue. And I think that we have hope for the future, but we have to be patient, because it is something that will involve next generations. When last year we, as IUM, we brought a few young boys from Lampedusa to Rome to run during the Grand Gala in the Olympic Stadium. They were all the Italian school, a lot of Italian schools were gathered in the Olympic Stadium, and they were running. And I remember that there were these schools. The guys were about 11, 13 years old. They were Italians of Chinese origin, African origin, all nationality, well, all origins actually. And we, as adults, we saw them, oh look, they are from China, they are from Africa. But for them, they were from Juventus, Roma, not black or Chinese or whatever. They didn't notice the children that already, they are already there. I mean, we just have to wait for the next generation to understand that. About the integration, there is something that I would like to add, that we are quite worried as IOM. This is just a small thing that I wanted to say before, that there are many asylum requests that have been now being considered by the commissions in Italy. As we know, a lot of people who are actually refugees, well, asylum seekers, like Syrians or Eritreans, they used to leave the country after a few days. And there are many nationalities who stay in Italy and they wait for the interview that they are coming from Western Africa, Nigerians, Gambia, Malians, etc. Many of them will have some kind of international protection, but there are also a lot of people that will not have any kind of protection, and they will be, their request will be rejected. They will receive some denials. And the point is that they can appeal to the decision of the Commission, but then again, there will be a lot of people that will be again rejected, and they will become irregular. They will be given the order to leave the country within 15 days or something, and they will stay in the country. That is a huge problem, because all these people, they will end up working in the black market in some economic sector, like the agricultural sector, especially in southern Italy, not only, but especially in southern Italy, is something that they are experiencing a lot. This is not nothing new, I mean. But these are all manpower for the black market who are currently waiting for this for free manpower, and this is something that must be addressed by the Italian government in some ways, with controls on the people who are currently working in some regions. I'm talking about Campania and Apulia and Sicily as well, because thousands of migrants will start to work with tomatoes and oranges, etc. And it's something that in Italy, it's a problem that for the moment no one is addressing in a very efficient way.
The
Maybe just very quickly, one best practice program, Carta di Roma. It's this organization of journalists, and when you talk about educating, I think Carta di Roma, they have achieved something here in Italy. A couple of years ago, the media was basically talking about clandestini and illegals. And nowadays this has changed. They are now human beings and they are refugees and they are migrants. So I think that is something which has worked, and they continue to work very hard, Carta di Roma, and do a good job and help to bring ethical reporting into journalism and media.
Mr. Hein, would you like to comment on that?
Well, I think you raised a very important aspect. Yeah, we put a lot of attention to the arrivals, the sea arrivals, Lampedusa as a symbol, and so, and not so much on what happens afterwards, and also what happens after that they have got finally a recognized status and a resident permit and a work permit, and so, yeah. And then what? And then many of them we found really actually sleeping in the streets or in abandoned buildings and creating ghettos among them, yeah, and are really out of the mainstream of the society for a long time or forever. This is the second, let's say, priority for my organization and for many others, yeah, after the question of legal arrival, is the question of integration. We notice that last year there has been a legislative intervention creating a mechanism for a 2 years planning of integration programs with the Commission at the Ministry of Interior. This is now shifted mostly to the Ministry of Labor, and we are happy about this decision. But at the end of this decree, it is said, no cost, no cost. So how can you make integration when it has no cost? Yeah. And also AMIF also, yeah, does not help so much. These are relatively modest funds. So up to now, we have been concerned with projects on integration, models with here and there quite a success also, but this is regarding 300 refugees or 200 refugees, but not as a whole of the refugee population. Yeah? So we have in Italy not a real integration program. Work integration, housing integration, cultural integration, professionally made language training. Yeah? There we are really concerned that this is a factor which pushes people whether into the, let's say, gray zone of the society, yeah, as you mentioned also the exploitation and the agriculture and in construction industries and tourism industries and so on and so forth, but also pushing them towards other countries. Yeah, this is very clear. And there is a heavy responsibility, and we cannot just go on in Italy to address this with, on the view of projects, that there must be a real program, which is a different thing, a program, yeah, which should see, yeah, a collaboration between the central government, the regional governments, the municipalities, the international organizations, and in particular also the organizations of civil society. There is a start to do this, but as long as we have not a real integration fund, yeah, we will not make a great way.
With that, I would like to thank our panelists for joining us this evening. Before we go, I just want to remind everyone that on Wednesday evening, journalist Ima Vitelli will be joining us and interviewing a refugee who made the trip to Lampedusa from North Africa and settled in Rome. This is a great opportunity to hear firsthand account of what happens after a refugee arrives in Italy. Again, I want to thank our panelists and everyone for attending and encourage you all to continue the conversation over informal reception outside. Thank you.